The Old 76 House, located at 110 Main Street in Tampa, New York, is an establishment that has not only evolved as a result of its history, but embraces its past like a long-lost friend. The precise year the building began its existence remains something of a mystery. However, most agree it likely occurred around 1686. What we do know for certain is that Casparis maybe purchased the building in 1754, at which time he converted it into a public house called Maybe's Tavern. Today, the location stands as perhaps the oldest tavern in New York. In addition to its colorful history and tales of paranormal echoes from the past, it carries the distinction of acting as a prison for a prominent British officer during the American Revolution. The two men stared ahead into the darkness, quietly setting the oars into the black water beneath their small vessel. They gazed with alternating looks of uncertainty and consternation upon the figure of Joshua Head Smith, who happened to be seated in the bow of the craft and continuously admonished them to keep it down and row more silently. Their participation in this undertaking was an ordeal they had entered with great apprehension. In fact, they only reluctantly agreed when faced with repeated threats of arrest by an American general of great importance. And although this very same general related to the oarsmen that the mission they would be embarking upon would be of great significance and importance to their patriotic cause, his words rang hollow and offered them little comfort. They simply could not shake the feeling that something was just not right about their 6-mile river journey to the British sloop of war called the Vulture. As they drifted beside the enemy warship and pulled their oars into the craft, the only perceptible sound was the gentle lapping of water against the side of their vessel. Anxiety turned to unbridled fear as a figure emerged from the shadows and descended from above. Smith put a finger to his lips and motioned to be still. Within the dim light of the waning moon, a British officer of average stature and a light, agile frame stepped into the boat and seated himself without the exchange of a single word. Smith motioned to the oarsmen, and his message was clear: get moving and do it quietly. As the vessel moved towards the shore, the oarsmen stole sporadic glances in the officer's direction and grew more perplexed with each passing moment as to the true nature of their mission. The British officer appeared to be of considerable rank and importance. He exhibited handsome features and displayed a bearing of stoic aloofness that made it apparent that he was abundantly self-confident and keenly aware of his social class in comparison to that of their own. Before long, Smith guided the vessel toward an area along the shoreline known as Long Cove, a spot that lay just south of West Haverstraw along the Hudson's west shore. The British officer stepped from the boat and nodded in Smith's direction, clearly a cue for the men's departure. Moments later, the thud of hoofbeats could be heard approaching, and the officer ducked from view. Within a small clearing emerged a familiar figure, and the British officer stepped from the shadows. The rider dismounted and smiled. In kind, the British officer doffed his hat and bent to the waist as a formal gesture of respect. They looked upon each other with mutual admiration, and their hands locked in an embrace of old friends. And within that patch of woods, approximately 4 miles south of Stony Point, American General Benedict Arnold and British Major John-Andre would confer to devise a plan that would hopefully crush the Americans' ability to continue their rebellion against the Crown by cutting off New England from the rest of the colonies. Benedict Arnold was a brilliant and respected general in the Continental Army and looked upon as a bona fide American hero. But despite his close friendship with General George Washington and his many successes in battle, he was repeatedly overlooked for promotion by the Continental Congress, a fact that secretly gnawed at him. Although he had several political opponents who had him brought up on charges of corruption on multiple occasions, he was most often exonerated of all charges leveled at him. Even so, the psychological impact of so many unjustifiable accusations were just the type of scandalous maleficence that could easily derail a career. And although his strong friendship with Washington allowed him to take command of the fortifications at West Point, the repeated humiliations suffered at the hands of his antagonists were steadily scratching away at whatever patriotic fidelity for the cause he may have once felt. Around the same time as Benedict Arnold's seeds of disillusionment were beginning to blossom, the 28-year-old Arnold-Andre became Adjutant General of the British Army in America, carrying the rank of Major. His star was on the rise, and in April of 1779, he took charge of British secret intelligence. Andre was a charismatic fellow whose advanced education set him apart from his contemporaries. Fluent in English, French, German, and Italian, he had a pleasant manner that enthralled audiences with his many talents. Of particular irony, it was during Andre's time in Philadelphia that he courted Peggy Shippen. Yet, even though this courtship occurred prior to Shippen's marriage to Benedict Arnold, she continued to maintain contact with, as she described, her dear friend Major Andre. This peculiar arrangement led many to speculate that the Major secretly remained her paramour during her marriage to the American general. This unlikely pairing of conspirators stood beneath the first rays of dawn and plotted the surrender of West Point to British forces made possible by Arnold's role as saboteur. The military significance of the fortifications were crucial to the Continental Army's success, and losing them would have disastrous consequences. Arnold not only familiarized Andre with the fort's layout, but also agreed to sabotage the great iron chain that spanned the Hudson River from West Point to King's Ferry, preventing the passage of British warships. Major Andre had planned to be back aboard the Vulture by morning, but dawn had already broken as the men finalized their plans. Instead of chancing a daylight crossing, the two men rode several miles to the home of Joshua Hetsmith, located on present-day Treason Hill in West Haverstraw, to tie up any loose ends. For Andre, the morning took a dramatic turn for the worse when American troops, commanded by Colonel James Livingston, who were guarding Verplank's Point, began firing on the Vulture. The warship received so many direct hits it was forced to retire downriver, leaving the Major stranded and on his own. As a result of these unforeseen circumstances, it was decided the Major would have to proceed towards British lines by land. Yes, it could be dangerous, but he was confident in the company of Smith and the civilian clothes he was provided with for the journey. He was also given a passport that read, "Permit Mr. Anderson to pass the guards to the White Plains or below if he chooses, he being on public business by my directions. Be Arnold General." But inexplicably, Arnold had also given him 6 papers written in his own hand detailing the manner in which the fort could be taken. It was an unnecessary risk, as General Clinton, Andre's superior, already knew the fort's layout. Andre took the papers and hid them in his stockings. Bidding adieu to his co-conspirator, he departed with Smith as his guide. The trip was uneventful, and the pair successfully entered into the sphere of British-occupied territory. And even though Andre still had another 15 or so miles to go before reaching the safety of his lines, he had unshakable confidence that he was out of harm's way and felt secure enough to decidedly part company with Smith as his guide. With the utmost determination, Major Arnold-Andre decided to make the remainder of the trip on his own. On September 23rd, before the sun yet had time to burn away the morning chill, 3 men sat beside a patch of shrubbery along the edge of the road about a quarter-mile north of the village of Tarrytown. Without warning, their attention was swayed from their conversation towards the clattering of an approaching rider crossing the wooden planks of a nearby bridge. As local militiamen, they instinctively reached for their weapons and stood in the road to block passage. Major Andre approached the men cautiously and halted as they raised their muskets. Though unsure of the men's sympathies, one of the 3 was wearing a Hessian coat, which he took as a promising sign. He looked over at the coat, and in consideration of his own civilian disguise, felt compelled to announce his identity, suspecting that he was among loyalists. With measured confidence, he announced,
"Gentlemen, I hope you belong to our party."
What party would that be?
Came the response from one of the 3 named John Paulding. Andre sat tall in the saddle.
"Why, the lower party, of course."
We do, sir.
Came Paulding's reply. Andre, relieved to be amongst allies, boldly declared,
"Gentlemen, I am a British officer. I have been up the country on particular business and I do not wish to be detained a single moment."
The 3 men exchanged incredulous glances, and Paulding turned to the major and answered bluntly.
And we are Americans.
Realizing he was about to be taken prisoner, Andre quickly changed his story, pulling the pass he'd gotten from Benedict Arnold and handed it to his captors.
"God bless my soul,"
he exclaimed.
"A man must do anything to get along. I am a Continental officer going down to Dobbs Ferry to get information from below."
Paulding looked up from inspecting the pass and ordered Andre to dismount. The major then threatened the trio that this delay would bring them nothing but trouble for their efforts.
We care not for that,
came Paulding's answer as they pulled him from his mount. Beside a small creek, they searched Andre's clothing. One of the 3, David Williams, found $80 in Continental currency, which only heightened suspicion. He then ordered Andre to remove his boots. To this request, Andre balked. Williams forcibly removed his left boot and found 3 half sheets of paper wrapped in another. Pulling off the remaining boot, a second package was discovered. Williams handed the curious packets to Paulding, as he was the only one of the 3 who was literate. Paulding read the words scrawled across the makeshift envelope and recoiled in disbelief. Looking up, he exclaimed,
My God, he is a spy.
After a brief detention at Armonk, the prisoner was brought to Tappan, New York for questioning. While being questioned, he was to be held in custody at the American headquarters located in a place called Maybe's Tavern. Maybe's Tavern was much the same as other taverns strewn throughout the colonies. Their commonality was that they not only served as listening posts, headquarters, meeting places, mail drops, and rallying points, but they also linked together a network of correspondence throughout the colonies that allowed the rebellion to be undertaken as a collective effort. From New England through Savannah, the fires of independence stirred within these taverns. While imprisoned within the tavern, Major Andre nearly found the liberation he so desperately sought. For although the post commander, Lieutenant Colonel John Jameson, was familiar with all the evidence found on the major's person, he could not avail himself to the belief that a hero of Arnold's stature could be involved in such an act of sedition. In fact, so strong were his beliefs in this regard that he astoundingly decided to send Andre to Arnold himself. But yet again, fate intervened to thwart Andre's release. Just as the major was about to depart to be reunited with his co-conspirator, the head of the Continental Army Intelligence, Major Benjamin Talbot, arrived on the scene to foil Andre's flight towards freedom. He offered evidence that a high-ranking American officer was planning to defect to the British, and although the identity of this officer was still in question, Talmadge persuaded Jameson to bring the prisoner back and keep him under guard until the details could be elucidated. Colonel Jameson forwarded the 6 pieces of paper found in Andre's stockings to General Washington at once. Inexplicably, perhaps because he was unwilling to risk his military career by falsely accusing his superior of treason, Jameson also forwarded a note to Arnold informing him of the circumstances at hand. The note was received while at breakfast, whereas Arnold read it and quietly tucked it in his breast. He stood, excused himself, and left the room. Earlier, upon reading the evidence he had received, Washington sent a party to West Point to arrest Benedict Arnold. However, it was too late. Jameson's note to Arnold had unwittingly given the former American hero time to make his escape. The trial of Major John-Andre was swift. His defense was simply based upon the premise that the subordination of an enemy officer was an advantage taken at war. To his credit, even when trying to convince the court of his belief that it was an officer's right to corrupt an enemy during wartime, he did not attempt to pass the blame directly onto Arnold. 6 days after his capture, the board found Major Andre guilty of being behind American lines under a feigned name and in a disguised habit and ordered that Andre ought to be considered a spy. They also contended that, agreeable to the law and usage of nations, it was their opinion that he should suffer death. Resigned to his impending execution, Andre appealed to George Washington that his sentence be carried out by firing squad as opposed to the rules of war which deemed hanging the proper method of execution in regard to convicted spies. This point seemed to weigh heavily on Andre, for he discussed it openly with Talmadge during his captivity. Ironically, there were many American officers who did not feel strongly in favor of what was perceived to be a demeaning death at the business end of the noose. Many of these were officers to whom Andre endeared himself while in captivity at Maybe's Tavern. Even Alexander Hamilton wrote of Major Andre,
"Never perhaps did any man suffer death with more justice, or deserve it less."
The date of Major John-Andre's execution was initially scheduled to occur on September 30th at 5 p.m., but it was temporarily postponed due to an 11th-hour appeal to spare the Major's life by General Clinton. This appeal was ultimately denied by Washington, and the sentence was to be carried out at noon on October 2nd. The gallows were located upon a hill a short distance behind the tavern. This instrument of death was little more than a crudely constructed structure made of 2 forked trees with a third laid across its top. Beneath the gallows, which seemed unusually higher than normal, was a horse-drawn carriage that contained an open coffin. As noon of the appointed day arrived, a large number of people lined the street in front of the tavern. As many as 500 troops separated the crowd from a number of American generals who were in attendance. Andre, dressed in his British officer's uniform, was escorted from the building and began ascending the hill to meet his fate. Upon seeing the gallows for the first time, he appeared visibly shaken and was heard to utter,
"This is too degrading,"
adding that his mother and sisters would be mortified by the manner of his execution. However, following his momentary lapse of composure, Andre immediately regained a sense of equanimity and decided to embrace death with the same bearing he embraced life. He walked up the hill in a dignified manner of a gentleman until he came upon the spot where he would draw his final breath. He climbed upon the cart and refused a blindfold. He then placed the noose around his own neck. Moments later, Major John-Andre was dead. As if the ignominy Major Andre faced during his final moments wasn't enough to balance his ledger of misconduct, he was also made to suffer the disgrace of a quick burial beneath the very gallows upon which he died. And shamefully, for the next 41 years, that is exactly where he remained, buried upon a nondescript hill 3,000 miles from his homeland and approximately 1,200 feet to the rear of the tavern. Finally, his body was exhumed at the Duke of York's behest and reinterred at Westminster Abbey in London in 1821. Today, there remains not a single trace of the crude gallows that took the life of an enemy of America's quest for independence, except for a circular plot that surrounds a granite monument. Fortunately, the same cannot be said of Maybe's Tavern. Remarkably, the very same tavern that acted in the capacity of Andre's prison is still standing. Through the myriad of changes it experienced in its more than 2 centuries of existence, it has embraced its legacy and has not only survived, but thrives well into the 21st century. And although the building has been fully restored, it readily reveals the still beating heart of Maybe's Tavern. Today, what is claimed to be the oldest restaurant in America is known as the Old 76 House. The interior's hand-hewn floorboards and timbered ceilings fashioned from Kingswood that predates 1700, along with the structure's multiple fireplaces and leaning doorways, have all been lovingly restored by the Norden family to create a veritable time machine that can easily transport one back to September 1780 when Major John Andre roamed its halls. And more than a few say, he still does. There have been many whispers among employees and patrons alike who have claimed to have experienced odd occurrences within the structure that cannot be easily explained away as mere coincidence. One in particular centers around a glass hurricane lamp that rests upon table 2. On more than a few occasions, employees have arrived to find it on the floor beside the table, intact. Others report feeling a presence lingering at table 11 in off times, near the bar area. Although the reports of those feeling a presence amount to little in the way of substance, it is hard to dismiss the large number of similar claims by a variety of observers. There are those who have claimed to hear the pacing of boots across the wooden floorboards and disembodied voices. There have also been employees who are said to have heard patrons in the dining room after closing, only to find the premises empty upon inspection. Of an even more outlandish nature, there exists a tale told by a woman who claims she visited the tavern many years ago with her grandfather as a little girl. During their visit, she claims the bartender reached beneath the bar and pulled out a small box. He gently opened the box to reveal 2 small bones resting within a velvet lining. He asserted that they were toe bones of Major Andre. When asked how they came into his possession, he related they were secured by his great-grandfather, who was entrusted with the disinterment of Andre's remains in 1821. Whether or not there is any truth to this tale is uncertain at best, but it does make for some interesting fireside chit-chat. To their credit, ownership resists propagating such wild tales of the supernatural as might other establishments. They don't have to. Their food, service, and ambience provide more than enough reason to frequent the establishment and make it stand out as one of the gems within a region with more than a few options. The Old 76 House accommodates up to 150 guests across 4 distinctly styled dining rooms, each complemented by the warm glow of a fireplace. Its menu boasts an eclectic array of offerings that make for exquisite world-class dining in an historically romantic setting. The menu is as diverse as it is comforting and contains many takes on historical fare such as onion soup Lafayette, chicken pot pie, shepherd's pie, Yankee pot roast, duckling Hamilton, and traditional American meatloaf. In addition to its top-flight dinner menu that boasts such classic favorites such as halibut, scallops, crab cakes, and black Angus New York sirloin, it also offers a wide range of lunch items that will satisfy even the most discerning appetite. Items like the Tavern Burger and Oktoberfest are crowd pleasers for sure, but there's also a surprise or 2 tucked away in the menu that have become fan favorites. Items like alligator empanadas and wild boar sausage are unexpected treats that are as flavorful as they are exotic. Desserts and drinks are equally enticing at the Old 76 House. They also serve brunch where the Nutella-stuffed French toast and Bloody Marys are standout items. In addition to patio dining and live music several times a week, the venue hosts a number of private events such as weddings and corporate functions. But the establishment really comes alive during the holiday season when ownership decorates the premises with an old-time charm that easily invokes a festive spirit in anyone who passes through its doors. Owner Rob Norton is not merely a restaurateur, but something of an historian who revels in the history of his establishment and will entertain anyone who shows even the vaguest interest in days gone by. Having owned the establishment for the better part of 40 years, his continuous smile when speaking of colonial history shows how deeply passionate he is for what he does and the reverence he feels for all that has transpired. He is indeed a special individual. So whether you are a lover of history, an admirer of great food, or merely hoping to catch a glimpse of the great beyond, the Old 76 House fits the bill. This is truly a dining experience in every sense of the word. My only advice when visiting would be if you are approached by a gentleman of slim stature with a refined countenance who asks to which party you belong, I would dissuade you from answering. The party at table 2. If you like this content and would like to see more of the same, please click subscribe and feel free to leave me a comment if you have an infamous eatery you'd like to see covered.